Arakawa the butler was standing erect in front of Keiichi's room on the third floor. I contacted the police and was instructed not to allow anyone inside. He bowed respectfully. The doorway was still open since we'd broken down the door, and we could see Keiichi's toes through the space under Arakawa's arms. When will the police get here? Arakawa responded politely to Haruhi's question. It depends on whether the storm passes. According to the forecast, the weather will have improved by tomorrow afternoon, so I suppose they will arrive sometime in that vicinity. Haruhi kept glancing into the room. I have a few questions. What would you like to know? Did Keiichi and Yutaka not get along? Arakawa shifted slightly from his perfect butler posture. To be honest, I do not know, for I have only been working here for the past week. The past week? Haruhi and I asked. Arakawa nodded slowly. That would be correct. I am in fact an actual butler, though I was merely hired to be a part-time temporary butler. Our contract was for a brief 2 weeks during the summer. So it was just for this villa? You weren't previously employed by Keiichi? That would be correct. Arakawa the butler was only serving as Keiichi's butler while they were on this island. That opens up some possibilities. It appeared that Haruhi had the same question I did. Does the same go for Mori? Was she also a temporarily hired maid? It's just as you say, she was hired at the same time. That's rather bold. Keiichi hired a butler and a maid solely for the summer vacation? I have a feeling that wasn't the best way to spend his money. Still, a butler and a maid, huh? A minuscule doubt was tugging at the edge of my mind and on the verge of falling off. I scooped it back up, and then I took a careful look at Arakawa's face. All I could see was an old gentleman who was the definition of sincere. That was probably the correct judgment call, but still, I kept my mouth shut and smothered that doubt. I'll have to toss that question at this guy when I see him later. I see. So there can be permanent and temporary servants. That information should be very helpful. Helpful for what? Haruhi nodded as though she just figured something out. There's nothing for us to do here if we can't go into the room, Kyon. Let's move on. She took my arm again and stomped off. Where are we going this time? Outside, to check if the boat's still there. I can't say I'm very inclined to walk through the middle of a hurricane with Haruhi. You see, I only believe what I see with my own eyes. Information that's passed around through hearsay tends to be distorted. Understood? Kyon, it's critical to obtain information from a primary source. Information from secondary sources that have gone through other hands cannot be trusted. Yeah, I suppose that's a reasonable view, but you'll end up unable to trust anything that's outside your own little world. While I considered the usefulness of information media, Haruhi dragged me to the first floor where we ran into Sonomori. Are you going outside? Mori asked Haruhi and me. Haruhi responded, Yep, we're going to check if the boat is there. I don't believe it is. Why? Mori smiled thinly before answering. It was last night. Master Yutaka appeared to be in a hurry as he headed for the entrance. Haruhi and I exchanged glances. So you're saying that Yutaka took the boat and left the island? Mori continued smiling thinly as her lips moved. I only happened to pass him in the hallway and never actually saw Master Yutaka go outside. However, that was the last time I saw Master Yutaka. What time was it? Asked Haruhi. I believe it was around 1 a.m. We would have been inebriated and sound asleep at the time. Was this confirmation that the suit-clad Keiichi had collapsed on the floor around the same time? We opened the door, to be pelted by raindrops. Once we managed to squeeze past the door, which barely budged because of the gale-force winds, Haruhi and I were completely soaked within a matter of seconds. Guess I should have just worn my swimsuit. The gray, cloudy sky looming over our heads with no end in sight reminded me of being in a closed space. I guess I'm just not very fond of the concept of a monochrome world. Let's go. Haruhi gallantly advanced through the rain, with her hair and t-shirt sticking to her body because of it. I had no choice but to follow. Haruhi's hand was still gripped around my wrist. We probably would have been launched into the air by this wind if we had wings. Helpless against the pouring rain, we made our way until we could see the wharf. There was a possibility of falling off the cliff if we weren't careful. Even I was starting to feel the danger of the situation. I didn't want to fall by myself, so I grabbed Haruhi's wrist and returned. I figured that I'd have a higher chance of surviving a fall if I was with her. We finally reached the top of the stairs. Can you see, Kyon? Haruhi's words were almost carried away by the wind. I nodded in response. Yeah. The wharf was practically submerged as the giant wave after giant wave crashed against the bank. The boat's gone. If it wasn't washed away, somebody took it and left. Our only means of getting off this island. I looked across the sea, but the fancy cruiser was nowhere to be seen. Golly gee. And so we were now stranded on this remote island. We returned to the villa at the same snail's pace. By the time we made it inside the door, we were both completely wet. Please use these. Mori had apparently been waiting thoughtfully as she handed us towels before continuing in a reserved voice. Did you find anything? It was just like you said. Haruhi had a disappointed look on her face as she dried her black hair. The cruiser is gone. We don't know when it disappeared, though. Mori continued to smile like the glow of a firefly. Not sure if that was just how she naturally looked. If she was upset by the death of Keiichi Tamaru, it was hidden underneath her calm and professional demeanor. Though, I suppose this would be a normal reaction from a temporarily hired maid. We apologized to Mori for dripping water all over the hallway. Haruhi and I returned to our respective rooms for a change of clothes. Come to my room when you're finished, Haruhi said on our way up the stairs. It's better to stay together in these situations. I'll worry if I don't have my eye on everyone. Besides, on the off chance that... Haruhi shut her mouth as she was about to say something. Somehow, I had a feeling I knew what she was going to say, so I didn't say anything. We reached the second floor to find Koizumi standing in the hallway. We appreciate you going out in this weather. Koizumi had his usual smile on his face as he nodded in our direction. We were in front of Haruhi's room. What are you doing? Koizumi's smile grew strained as he shrugged in response to Haruhi's question. I came to Suzumiya's room to discuss what we do next, but Nagato wouldn't let me in. Why not? I don't have the slightest idea. Haruhi pounded on the door. Yuki, it's me. Open the door. After a brief moment of silence, we heard Nagato's voice through the door. I was told not to open the door for anyone. It seemed that Asahina was still unconscious. Haruhi fiddled with the towel draped around her neck. It's okay now, Yuki. Open up. That would require me to violate the order to not open the door for anyone. Haruhi looked at me with her jaw dropped before turning back to the door. Okay, Yuki. When I said anyone, I meant anyone besides us. Kyon, Koizumi, and I don't count. We're all in the SOS brigade together, right? That was never mentioned. I have interpreted the order to mean that I should not open the door for anybody at all. Nagato's soft voice sounded like a priestess reading an oracle to a scribe. Hey, Nagato. I couldn't put up with this any longer, so I couldn't. Haruhi's order has been rescinded. Or here, I'll override her order. Just open the door. Please? Nagato spent a few seconds thinking on the other side of the wooden door. Then there was a click as the door unlocked and slowly opened. Nagato's eyes passed over the area above us before she silently retreated into the room. Geez, Yuki, you need to be more flexible. You should be able to understand what I mean. Haruhi told Koizumi to wait for her to get changed before entering the room. I was also dying for some dry clothes. I'll back off for now. See you, Koizumi. As I walked away, I had a sudden thought. Was that whole exchange supposed to be Nagato's idea of a joke? If that were the case, it would be a pretty lame attempt at wordplay, and not very funny. Give me a break, Nagato. Your face and expressions never change, so I can only assume that you're always serious. You could at least smile when you're telling a joke. You could even smile for no reason the way Koizumi does. I guarantee you'll look better that way. Except that now isn't the time to be smiling. I took off my wet clothes and also changed my underwear before going back out into the hallway to find that Koizumi was no longer outside. I went to Haruhi's room and knocked on the door. It's me. The door was opened by Koizumi. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. So it seems that the cruiser was gone. Koizumi leaned against the wall. Haruhi sat cross-legged on the bed. Even Haruhi couldn't find any joy in the current situation as she looked up sullenly with a listless expression on her face. It wasn't there, right, Kyon? Yeah, I said. Koizumi spoke next. It would appear that somebody took it and escaped. No, there's no point in being ambiguous. The one who escaped was Yutaka. How do you know? I asked. Nobody else could have done it, Koizumi answered coolly. Nobody else was invited to this island, and the only guest missing from the manor is Yutaka. It doesn't matter how you look at it. He must have stolen the boat and made a run for it. Koizumi continued in a smooth voice. In other words, Yutaka was the culprit. He probably escaped while it was still dark. Based on the fact there had been no signs of anyone sleeping in Yutaka's bed and Mori's testimony, Haruhi informed Koizumi of the previous conversation. As impressive as always, Suzumiya, you've already heard from her. Koizumi engaged in his ass-kissing while I snorted for no real reason. Yutaka appeared to be in a hurry, as though he was frightened. Or something. That would match the testimony from the last witness to see him. I also checked with Arakawa. Even so, heading out to sea in the middle of the night during a hurricane would practically be suicide, wouldn't it? Something may have happened which created the need to escape in a hurry, such as the need to flee the scene of a murder. Does Yutaka know how to operate a cruiser? I was unable to verify that information, but we can draw our own conclusion from the end result, since the boat is gone. Hold it right there. Honey, raised her hand for the right to speak. What about the door to Keiichi's room? Who locked it? Was it also Yutaka's work? Not necessarily, Koizumi gently refuted her. As Arakawa said, Keiichi possessed both the key to the room and the spare. Further investigation revealed that both keys were within the room. Someone could have made a duplicate. I tossed that idea into the fray. Koizumi shook his head. This was Yutaka's first visit to the manor. I doubt he would have had the time to make a duplicate. Koizumi spread his arms with a sigh of defeat. A hush fell over the room as clashing sounds of strong winds and pouring rain faded into the background. Haruhi and I waited in silence, unable to find anything to say until it was broken by Koizumi. However, there would be a slight discrepancy if Yutaka committed the crime last night. What do you mean? Asked Haruhi. When I touched Keiichi earlier, his skin was still warm, as though he had been alive a short while ago. Koizumi suddenly smiled. Then he turned to the reticent inspector who stood next to Asahina like an attendant. Nagato, what was Keiichi's body temperature when we found him? 97.34 degrees. Nagato responded without missing a beat. Hold on, Nagato. How do you know that without ever touching him? And you answered instantly, as though you had been expecting the question. But I didn't say any of that out loud. The only person who might have questioned the prior exchange was Haruhi, but she must have been too busy thinking since she didn't notice anything wrong. That's practically normal body temperature. When was the crime committed then? The body temperature of a human being after death drops around a couple degrees every hour. We can use this information to estimate that Keiichi died less than an hour before we found him. Wait, Koizumi. I couldn't hold myself back this time. Didn't Yutaka run off while it was still night? Yes, that's what I said. But the time of death was within the hour of finding the body. That's how the numbers worked out. I pressed my hand against my forehead. So Yutaka left the villa sometime in the middle of the night during a hurricane, and hid himself somewhere before returning in the morning to stab Keiichi and escape on the boat? No, that would be incorrect. He easily dodged that one. Even if we allow for a margin of hour based on the estimated time of death, we still have to assume that it happened within an hour before we found his body. However, we were already awake and in the dining hall by that time, but we didn't see any sign of Yutaka or even hear a single sound. Even with a hurricane outside, that would be unnatural. What does that mean? Haruhi said in a sullen voice. Her arms were crossed as she glared at Koizumi and me. You're not going to learn anything by glaring at me. If you want answers, tell the smiling boy next to me. Koizumi continued in a light tone as though we were talking about the weather. This wasn't a sinister murder. It was merely a tragic accident. You don't look too upset about it. There is no doubt that Yutaka stabbed Keiichi, or else there wouldn't be a reason for Yutaka to escape. Well, that makes sense. I do not know the motive or circumstances involved, but Yutaka attacked Keiichi with a knife. He probably had it hidden behind his back as he came from the front. Keiichi had no time to brace himself, so he was probably unable to resist at all when he was stabbed. He sounds like he saw the whole thing happen. However, the tip of the knife had yet to reach his heart. I'm not sure it had even touched his skin. The knife was thrust into the notepad in Keiichi's chest pocket, meaning the notepad was the only casualty. Huh? What do you mean? Haruhi's brow creased as she spoke. Then how did Keiichi die? Somebody killed him? Nobody killed him. There is no killer in this case. Keiichi ended up that way, purely by accident. What about Yutaka? Why did he run away? Because he believed he had killed Keiichi. Koizumi answered calmly as he raised his index finger. Does he think he's one of those famous detectives? Allow me to explain my thinking. The sequence of events went as follows. Last night, Yutaka went into Keiichi's room with a murderous intent and stabbed Keiichi with a knife. However, the knife was lodged into the notepad and didn't deliver a fatal wound. I have no idea what he's getting at, but I'll just listen for now. However, this is when it got complicated. Keiichi believed that he had been stabbed. He still would have felt the force of the knife hitting the notepad. Furthermore, we can assume that he suffered a psychological shock at the sight of a knife sticking out of his own chest. I was beginning to understand where Koizumi was going with this. Come on now. No way. That misconception led to Keiichi fainting. While collapsing, he would have either fallen sideways or backwards. Koizumi paused to take a breath. Upon witnessing Keiichi's collapse, Yutaka believed that he had killed him. What followed was simple. He could only escape. This wasn't a premeditated murder. Rather, he had merely used the knife in a heated moment of rage. So he stole the cruiser despite it being nighttime in the middle of a storm. Huh? But then... Haruhi spoke up before Koizumi interrupted her. Please allow me to continue my explanation. These actions taken by the unconscious Keiichi afterwards. He remained unconscious until this morning. We were wondering why he hadn't woken up, so we came to knock on the door to his room. So he was still alive at that time? The knocking on the door woke up Keiichi, and he stumbled to the door. However, he must have been in a daze considering how hard it was for him to get up in the morning. He was probably unable to think clearly. He was approaching the door half asleep when he finally remembered. Remembered what? Haruhi asked. Koizumi smiled at her. That his brother had tried to kill him. And once he recalled the sight of Yutaka with a knife in his hands, Keiichi promptly locked the door. I couldn't hold myself back, so I interjected. Don't tell me that's supposed to explain the whole sealed room deal. I'm afraid so. After being unconscious for so long, Keiichi had lost sense of time. He believed that Yutaka had returned. We were probably only a second or two late. The instant I grabbed the doorknob from the outside, it was locked from the inside. The killer wouldn't knock on the door if he came to finish him off. Keiichi's mind was still hazy, so he made a poor, spur-of-the-moment decision when he wasn't thinking clearly. That's some pretty arbitrary reasoning. And so, Keiichi backed away from the door after locking it. His instincts must have told him that he was in danger. That was when tragedy struck. Koizumi shook his head the way a person would when telling a tragedy. Keiichi tripped over his feet and fell to the floor, like this. Koizumi bent his body as though he were falling forward. As a result, the knife stuck in the notepad near where his chest pushed into his body by the force of the handle hitting the floor, and the blade pierced his heart, leaving him dead. Koizumi looked at Haruhi and me with our mouths wide open like idiots before he continued in a firm voice. That is what really happened. What was that? Keiichi died for such a stupid reason? How could everything happen so conveniently? The whole knife perfectly missing. Then, not missing is one thing, but Yutaka should have realized if he'd killed Keiichi or not. I prepared my rebuttal. Ah! Haruhi suddenly shouted, which made me jump. Where'd that come from? Koizumi, but... Haruhi said before freezing all of a sudden. Her face was filled with shock. Why was she shocked? Was there a part of Koizumi's story she couldn't accept? Haruhi's eyes drifted over towards me. When her eyes met mine, she quickly looked away and turned back toward Koizumi, before deciding against it and looking up to the ceiling for some reason. Never mind. I'm sure that's what happened. How should I put it? After muttering incomprehensibly for a while, she fell silent. Asahina was still asleep, while Nagato stared blankly at Koizumi. For now, the meeting was adjourned. We returned to our individual rooms. According to Koizumi, the police would be coming once the storm calmed down, so we should have our belongings packed up by that time. After killing some time doing nothing in particular, I had come up with a number of questions, so I headed to a certain room. What does it matter? Koizumi looked up from where he was folding his clothes and smiled at me. We need to talk. There was one reason I had come to Koizumi's room. I can't accept it. That's right. Koizumi's deduction hadn't explained everything. There were gaping holes. If we go by your explanation, the corpse should have been found face down, but Keiichi was lying face up. How do you explain that? Koizumi stood up from where he'd been sitting on his bed and turned to face me. There's a simple reason for that. The deduction I revealed to everyone was a false explanation. I didn't show any visible reaction. Figures. The only one who would have eaten up that story was Asahina, and she wasn't even conscious. I could just ask Nagato to tell me everything, but that'd feel like cheating, so I'd rather not. Tell me what you were really thinking. Koizumi's handsome face broke into a smile, and he chuckled in a low voice that grated on my ears. Then I should tell you that the explanation I previously gave was true up to a point. However, the last part was different. I kept my mouth shut. Keiichi approached the door with a knife stuck in his chest. Everything up to that point was true. So was locking the door by reflex. That was when the story diverged. Koizumi motioned for me to sit down in a chair, but I ignored him. It appears that you've realized the truth. I must admit that I underestimated you. Just keep talking. Koizumi shrugged. We ran into the door and destroyed it, or to be specific, myself, you, and Arakawa. Then the door was opened. Our momentum carried us inside. I kept quiet as I motioned for him to keep going. You should already know the end result. Keiichi was sitting right next to the door when it burst open and hit the front of his body and the handle of a knife. I tried to picture that scene in my mind, and consequently the knife was driven into Keiichi's chest and led to his demise. Koizumi sat back down on the bed and looked up at me provocatively. In other words, the culprits were... Koizumi smiled as he whispered to me, myself, you, and Arakawa. I looked down at Koizumi. If I had a mirror, I could have seen the chilling look on my face. Koizumi didn't seem to care as he continued talking. Suzumiya also realized the truth the way you did. That's why she stopped herself when she was about to tell us. She didn't want to accuse any of us of wrongdoing. She also wanted to protect her good friends. Koizumi had a solemn look on his face. I still couldn't accept what he was saying. My neocortex had deteriorated to the point where I would be tricked by his second fake deduction. I snorted and glared at Koizumi. Sorry, but I don't trust you. What do you mean? Your goal may have been to sell the second explanation with your tricky deduction, but you'll have to try harder if you want to fool me. Didn't I sound cool just now? I'll keep going. Just think about the fundamental problem here. As in, focus on the murder itself. Got it? There's no way something like that could have happened under such convenient circumstances. Now it was Koizumi's turn to silently motion me on. I don't know if the hurricane was a coincidence or how he's doing, but it doesn't really matter in this case. The problem would be that we've got a dead body on our hands as a result. I paused to lick my lips. You would probably claim that the whole thing happened because Haruhi wished for it. However, despite what she says, Haruhi does not actually wish for anyone to die. That would be obvious if you've watched her, which means that this whole incident wasn't caused by Haruhi. And are you listening? It wasn't a coincidence. We were here when it happened. Oh, said Koizumi, so what does that mean? The true culprit behind this incident, or actually this trip, the summer SOS Brigade camp, would be you. Am I wrong? Koizumi's smiling face froze for a few seconds as he was caught off guard. However, a trickling sound came from Koizumi's throat. You've got me. How did you know? As Koizumi said that, he looked at me with eyes that were the same as when we were in the literary club room. I guess my brain tissue wasn't gray for no reason, I continued, feeling somewhat relieved. Back when you asked Nagato for the body temperature of the corpse. What about that? You used the temperature to estimate the time of death or whatever. Indeed I did. Nagato can be very useful. As she knows, she can pretty much tell us anything. You should have asked Nagato for the estimated time of death instead of the body temperature. No, it wouldn't be an estimate. She could probably tell you the exact time of death now to the exact second. I see. If you had asked for the time of death, Nagato would have answered that he wasn't dead. Also, you never referred to Tamaru's body as a corpse. I was trying to be fair. There's still more. I'm actually an attentive person, though it may not seem that way. The interior side of the door to Keiichi's room. According to your explanation, the door hit the handle of the knife with a fair amount of force, enough to drive the knife into a human body. If that much force had been involved, there should have been some kind of indentation on the door, but there wasn't. The door looked brand new without a scratch. What splendid powers of observation! And one more thing. It concerns Arakawa and Mori. The story that they hadn't even been here for a week yet. You said they were hired a week ago, and that's when they came to this island, right? That's right. Is there something odd about that? There is. There definitely is. Your behavior was odd. Remember the first day we were here? What did you say when Arakawa and Mori came to get us off the ferry? Well, what did I say? It's been quite some time. Those were your words. Why would you say that? You said that this was your first time on this island, so this should have been the first time you ever met them. Why would you greet Arakawa and Mori as though you were already acquainted with them? Shouldn't that be impossible? Koizumi chuckled. I took his laughter to be an open confession. All the tension left my body as I finally understood the whole picture, and Koizumi began to talk. That's right. This whole affair was a setup, a grand act, though I didn't expect you to realize it. Don't underestimate me. Excuse me. However, I must admit that I was surprised. I had intended to reveal the truth at a later time, but I didn't expect to be caught so soon. Which means that Tamaru, Mori, and everyone else was all in on it, right? They're probably all members of that agency thing, right? That is correct. Pretty good acting for a bunch of amateurs, don't you think? The knife in the chest was a trick one with a retractable blade. The red blood stain was actually paint. Keiichi was only pretending to be dead, of course, and the missing Yutaka had merely moved the cruiser to the other side of the island. Koizumi revealed the truth in an easy manner. Why did you come up with this plan? To ease Suzumiya's boredom, and to lessen our burden. What do you mean by it? I'm pretty sure I've already told you this. Basically, we were trying to provide Suzumiya with entertainment to prevent her from getting any strange ideas. For the time being, Suzumiya is focused on the current turn of events, is she not? Except that Haruhi thinks we're killers. Is that a good idea? After the presumed murder, Haruhi had been unusually quiet. She'd appeared to be deep in thought. Creepy as hell. Then I'll have to move up the schedule, Koizumi said. According to our plan, we were returned by the ferry to the harbor on the mainland to find the four of them, Keiichi, Tamaru, and Yutaka, along with Arakawa and Mori, greeting us with smiles. That was the ending we'd prepared. Naturally, we could hide anything concerning the agency and stick to the story that they're my relatives. So you actually had a surprise party planned. I sighed. I hope Haruhi has a good sense of humor. If she gets seriously pissed, you'll have to deal with her, 'cause I'll be long gone. Koizumi winked at me as he smiled. That would be quite the predicament. I should probably apologize to her soon then. I shall go with Tamaru and everyone else to bow our heads in apology. I'm sure he's getting tired of playing a corpse. I kept my mouth shut as I looked out the window. I wondered how Haruhi would react. Would she go into a mad rage about being tricked, or would she just smile and laugh it off? Either way, she'll end up in a mental state that's easier to understand than the one she's in now. Koizumi smiled wryly as he continued. I had people ready to play the roles of detective and forensic expert, but it appears that those preparations will go to waste. In any case, I didn't expect such a non-eventful ending. The original agenda included a search of the mansion as well as gathering evidence from the scene of the crime. It didn't work out too well. That just shows you didn't think this through enough. As I looked up at the clouds, I wondered how clear the skies would be in a few hours. In the end, Koizumi wasn't stripped of the title of Vice Brigade Chief. The hurricane quickly disappeared, and we took the ferry back under a bright blue sky. Haruhi was in a good mood that lasted the entire trip up till we parted ways in front of the station. It's a good thing that Haruhi knows how to take a joke. In return on the ferry trip back, Koizumi had to buy box lunches and canned juice for everybody. I feel that he'd gotten off pretty lightly. Nagato, who probably knew what was going on from the beginning, showed no reaction. Asahino woke up to yell, "That was so mean!" and pout in an adorable manner. But once Koizumi and the Tamaru brothers, along with the two servants, bowed their heads in apology, she quickly said, Ah, it's fine. Please don't worry about it. I figured I should include that little episode in here. Incidentally, Haruhi had made the following request when we were all lined up to take a picture on the dock of the ferry during the trip back to the mainland. I'll be counting on you for our winter camp, Koizumi. Come up with a better scenario this time. We'll be going to a mountain retreat, and there has to be a blizzard. You better provide an appropriately designed manner this time, or I'll be mad. Yep, I can't wait. Well, what to do? Koizumi turned to me for salvation, looking like a rookie German officer who'd received a direct order from the Fuhrer himself to capture the Supreme Allied Commander with a serious single squad on the European Western Front during the waning years of World War II. I looked at Koizumi the way you would look at a defender who had just made a beautiful shot during his own goal, during what had been a tie championship match up to that point, before speaking insincerely. Beats me. I'm also looking forward to it, Koizumi. I assume that I can at least expect a solution that isn't so weak that even I could figure it out. And so Haruhi won't be so bored with the ordinary to the point where she would cause extraordinary phenomena to happen. The end. I love you.